There are ships in the void that never stop screaming. Some scream with torn hulls and failing reactors. Some cry out with desperate vox-pleas, silent to all but the warp. But a few, just a few, speak in voices long dead. This is one of those ships. The Mechanicus calls it Venter Malum, the mouth of evil. It was found adrift near the Eye of Terror, covered in World Eater's iconography so old it belonged to the Great Crusade. No distress signal, no light, no motion. But the vox still played. It played a hymn no living cleric remembered, and yet somehow, all who heard it wept. This story is taken from recovered logs. They were broken, scattered, hard to decode. The tech priest who found them never returned. Neither did his crew. But the echoes they left behind were strong enough to piece together what happened aboard that shrine ship. You will not find answers here. Just voices, machines that whisper, chapels that bleed, names once spoken in glory now drowned in madness. So lie still, close your eyes, and listen carefully. This is the Butcher's Lament. He walked into the dark chapel, and the candles bowed. They said the ship had no soul left in it, that it had been forgotten during the Great Heresy and never returned. Its last registered captain had served under the World Eater's Legion before they fell, before the Butcher's nails took everything that made them human. The Venter Malum was found drifting near the edge of the Eye of Terror, cold, silent, not dead. The Magos Reclamator, who first found it, Elur Marn, sent one vox transmission before disappearing. That message didn't ask for help. It didn't explain what he found. He only said, "The ship weeps. It bleeds thought." Then he laughed. Then he screamed. They say some ships dream, not with machine minds, but with echoes. When a warship watches 10,000 years pass without moving, its memory gets heavy. Heavy enough to warp metal and prayer. The Mechanicus tried to erase what Elur recorded, but some files broke loose. Snippets, scraps, sounds. We stitched together what remained. The ship had no lights on her hull. She drifted without signal, no running lamps, no crew vox. Only her name was clear. Venter Malum carved in high Gothic near the bow, the lettering etched as if done by hand, not machine. The Mechanicus survey craft orbited her for 16 hours before boarding. They logged a dozen flybys. No defense systems activated. No auger ping came back. Even Auspex readings failed. The ship didn't hide. She simply refused to be known. Magos Elur Marn stood at the airlock, his servo skull drifting behind him. He adjusted his rebreather and reviewed the ship's last entry on the data slate. It was ancient. That alone made the find priceless. A relic vessel from the days of the Great Crusade. No signs of battle, no obvious warp corruption on the hull, just that silence, heavy and complete. He sent Enginsir Varnok ahead with a light drone to test the seal. The drone buzzed and clicked as it entered through a wide hatch. The door didn't hiss or grind. It opened smooth, almost welcoming. The air inside wasn't pure, but it wasn't toxic either. The pressure held. That surprised them. "This ship is too clean," Varnok said. "No corrosion on the inner lock. That's not natural." Elur agreed but said nothing. He didn't like to speculate aloud. The ship had mass and form, but something about it felt thin, like it wasn't fully real, as if the deeper you stared, the more of it you lost. They entered the main passage. The walls bore faded paint, mostly red with white trim. Legion markings were found beneath several layers. One fragment near the junction still bore a half-burned Aquila, melted by heat too precise to come from a fight. The silence had weight. They walked down a corridor that stretched longer than expected, the ceiling arching into vaulted ribs. This was not standard Legion design. World Eater's ships had been brutal, clean-cut, designed for war. This had more of a shrine's feel. Incense still hung in the air. Not burned recently, but not long dead either. That was impossible. At the first turning, Sister Archivist Thekla stopped. She traced a symbol on the wall with her gloved hand. It was crude, a jagged circle marked by 9 slashes across its face. "That's not Imperial," she said. "It's not Chaos either," Varnock whispered. "It's something else." Elua didn't respond. He was watching his servo skulls feed. In the next room, the walls were covered in what looked like handwritten script. Dozens of short lines written over one another again and again, all in Gothic, all the same phrase. He zoomed in. I heard his voice again. The same line, written by different hands. Ink, blood, burned into metal, carved with tools, even scraped in with fingernails. Varnock walked into the room. He turned once, then stopped. "It's a Vox shrine," he said. Thekla stepped in behind him. These were used to record war prayers, not common in Astartes ships after the heresy. Most were removed, purged. The Vox shrine was old, its casing cracked open, wires exposed. The console still had power. A faint red light pulsed in rhythm. Elua approached, placing a thin brass key into the port. The Vox activated on contact. It played nothing at first. Just wind. Then a voice. It wasn't loud, it was strained. Deep. Tired. "He walks again," it said. "In silence now. In silence. Always." The recording ended, then restarted. Same message. It looped. Varnock stared at it. "The voice isn't from this era." Elua nodded. He could feel it. The audio had weight, ancient Vox distortion, but with no degradation. The voice sounded too clear for a 10,000-year-old relic. It came through as if spoken seconds ago. He scanned the walls again. The script was newer than the recording. Different ink ages. A pattern. Multiple scribes, over time, which meant something remained aboard long after the original crew. Something that still heard the voice. They moved on, deeper into the vessel. Lights flickered without power. No sparks, no flame, but the glow returned when needed. Their footfalls didn't echo. Even that was strange. Ships this size usually sang with resonance. Thekla walked slower. She touched her temple now and then. She said the ship was whispering in hymns she half remembered. When Elua asked her what language, she said, Low Gothic. When he asked what the words were, she couldn't repeat them. She just whispered, It sounds like morning. They found the first body near the transit shaft. It wasn't skeletal. It was dry, preserved, kneeling with arms crossed over its chest, in Astartes armor now stripped of color. A helmet rested at its feet, turned backward. The flesh hadn't decayed. It was gray and smooth, stretched over a frame too large for a human, but too wrong for a marine. Elua scanned the gene matrix. The reading came back partial. World Eaters, Legion compliance pattern, but no match to any known file. I think he was made before the nails, Varnock whispered. Thekla frowned. That would make him a crusade chaplain, one of the first. They left the corpse untouched, not out of fear, out of a quiet that filled the hall once they saw it. Like the air held breath around the fallen warrior. like the ship did not allow them to move fast anymore. Further in, they reached a wide chamber with walls made of bone. Not literal, not organic, but shaped to resemble it. Curved ribs, interlocked spines, vaults that bent inwards. The center bore a broken pillar wrapped in chains. Dozens of chains, each one fastened to nothing, suspended in air, like waiting for something to return and be bound again. In the floor below the pillar, a word had been scratched again and again. Sorat. Thekla turned pale. She had read that name before, in a sealed document from the Librarium Hereticus, a chaplain of the 12, lost after Armatura, said to have vanished during the days when Angron still listened to counsel, before he stopped speaking to any but the nails. The word was not a name anymore. It was a wound. Varnock tapped the pillar. Why chains? Elua checked his cogitator. To bind a thought, or keep it from speaking, or perhaps to keep something from listening. They stayed too long in that room, not on purpose. Time didn't flow right there. Their internal chronometers marked 10 minutes. Their ship above said 4 hours had passed. When they returned to the outer hallway, the door they came through was gone. Just a smooth wall, no seams. Thekla began praying, not with words, but with rhythm, tapping her fingers in a pattern Elua recognized. It was an old war code, one used by the World Eaters before the heresy, a way to speak across long-range vox when the nails made speech impossible. He didn't ask her how she knew it. She didn't know she was doing it. The corridor ahead led deeper, into the ship's heart, into the red memory no one wanted to name. The vox behind them clicked once, then whispered, "He still fights." The corridor sloped downward. The floor was made of reinforced iron, but every few meters it clicked under their boots like something moved beneath. Varnock said it was probably old wiring. Elua didn't argue. He knew it wasn't. Thekla walked slower now. She kept her hands pressed together, whispering something under her breath. Elua asked her once to speak louder, but she didn't seem to hear him. She was reciting lines from an old Imperial catechism, the one used for dying worlds. He hadn't heard it in decades. Most of the words were wrong, backwards, mixed with other things. He didn't stop her again. They passed another door. The edges looked chewed as if it had been ripped open. The chamber inside was small and square, every wall covered in handprints. They were all red, not painted, smeared. Each handprint faced inward toward a single throne in the middle. Not a captain's chair, not a command seat, just a single iron throne, half melted, warped by heat. No one sat in it now, but the handprints suggested many had knelt here, or begged here. Elua took a recording and sealed the door behind them. The ship felt colder now, but the air had no chill. It was the kind of cold that sank into thought, made memory feel sharp. He started to hear something in the static coming off the walls. Not real sound, more like a rhythm, a beat, faint and heavy. It came and went, but it always returned after silence. Varnock found the first active panel 2 levels down. It was locked behind a heavy bulkhead, but his servos cut through cleanly. Inside, the walls glowed with red runes. It was a gene record chamber, one of the older kinds, used before the Great Scouring. The cogitator bank was still alive, humming. That alone was rare. These systems were meant to preserve identity records, combat logs, oaths, even pain responses, burned directly into the core during service. But these logs were locked. Elua tried a dozen keys. None worked. Then the system opened by itself. The screen lit with a single name. Chaplain Sorat. There were no titles, no ranks, just the name. Elua ran the bioscan. The system showed partial compatibility. That meant the body upstairs, the kneeling Astartes without a face, had once been Sorat, but only in part. Something had been added or removed. He pulled one file. It wasn't a log. It was a dream. The image came in blurred waves. A battlefield. Red sky. Dead titans in the distance. A voice shouting words in no clear tongue. Then silence and a final phrase. They made me forget how to pray. The screen went dark. Varnock stepped back. His hands trembled. Why store a dream in a gene record? Elua said nothing. He knew the answer. Some Marines couldn't sleep after the nails. The implants made thought too loud. They forgot how to feel, how to reflect. But a few kept fragments, and those were stored not for remembrance, but for warning. Thekla began to bleed from one nostril. She wiped it away without noticing. Her eyes stared at the blank screen like it still played. They left the room. No one spoke. The ship changed again. Doors moved. Hallways bent. They passed a corridor they had already marked. But now the symbol was reversed, like they had walked around a thought and come back from the wrong side. Varnock started to count his steps. Every seventh step echoed. The others didn't. When he stopped to test the sound, it vanished completely. The silence grew too perfect. No hum, no air, like the ship had paused its breath. They entered a circular room. At its center stood a statue, human in shape, but tall, armored, face blank. Around it were rows of seats. Old bones sat in some of them, still wrapped in tattered robes. Each skull faced the center. Each hand held a data slate. Elua scanned one. No words appeared, but Varnock said he heard something. I hear preaching. Thekla nodded. He's speaking to them. Still. They stood there for a long time. The room held no threat, but it watched them. The statue was not just a decoration. It radiated pressure. Not warp, not mechanical, but something close to memory. Like the ship had placed a thought in stone and made it permanent. Elua turned to leave. Then the vox clicked again. Only once. But the message came anyway. A burst of static. Then a voice. It wasn't the same voice from the shrine. This one was younger, clearer, still strained, but without decay. I see you, it said. You wear red beneath the skin. Varnock backed away. That wasn't a message. That was real time. Elua checked the frequency. It wasn't coming from the bridge or the engines. It was coming from the deep vault. A section listed in no map. Not even the Mechanicus registry. He didn't want to go there, but he knew the story wouldn't end without it. They marked the location. It lay beneath the chapel decks, past the core sanctum. They would have to pass through the ossuary. Thekla said the ossuary wasn't on the blueprints, but she remembered it anyway. I saw it in a dream, she whispered. Elua asked her how. She didn't reply. They began moving again, this time slower. Every step forward made the walls thinner. The steel turned pale in some places, as if bleached. Patterns began to form along the panels. Runes and symbols, none repeated. No logic, just shapes and slashes. A slow code written in madness. One shape returned often. A broken skull, with lines coming from the mouth, some kind of sound or scream. The sound returned, low and steady now. The beat. Elua knew it wasn't imagined. The nails had a rhythm, a pulse, a hunger. He had studied them once, long ago. They were more than pain engines. They were memory filters. They carved identity away in layers, until only violence remained. This ship carried the last echoes of those thoughts, not just from one warrior, from many. All of them stacked together, folded into each deck and wall, turned inward like prayer. At the next chamber, Varnock froze. The room was filled with armor, not stored, not mounted, laid out, cleaned. Pieces stacked like offerings. Each helmet bore the same scar, split down the faceplate. Each chest plate painted with blood. The symbols carved into the ceramite were not legion marks. They were made with blades, each one a sentence. One said, "He heard me scream." Another said, "The battle never stopped." Thekla walked past them, eyes glassy. She touched one gauntlet and flinched. They remember. Elua moved to the center. A large iron disc rested there, slightly raised. No symbols, just a single rune burned into the floor. He scanned it. The rune translated to listening, not recording, not watching, just that. He reached down to touch the disc. The moment his finger made contact, the vox screamed. Not loud, not sharp, but long. A cry drawn from the gut of the ship. It didn't play through speakers. It rose from the walls, from every panel and bolt. It lasted only 6 seconds. Then silence returned. Varnock staggered back. His skin had gone white. "I saw something," he said. "Not light, not sound, just force." Thekla had collapsed. Her lips moved fast, repeating a word. "Armatura," she whispered. Elua stared at the disc. It no longer glowed, but his cogitator recorded a surge. The scream had shape, pattern, like a spoken name, drawn over itself hundreds of times. That meant one thing. Someone had built the ship's vault as a memory chamber. Not to remember, but to trap memory. Whatever they found next would not be old, it would be alive. Their descent led into chambers with shifting light and walls that remembered. Each corridor carried the weight of voices, not in echoes but impressions that slid through the cracks in thought. The deeper they walked, the harder it became to tell where sound ended and memory began. Beneath the upper decks, the design shifted. Shrine architecture gave way to something colder. The walls narrowed, metal softened in shape, formed into folds that curved inward like ribs. The floor bore sigils worn to near disappearance. Some were imperial, others ancient, none readable in full. When Elua's steps touched the lower rung of the next level, the air pressed inward, and the walls began to hum. They entered a room shaped like a circle, vox towers stationed around its edge. Each tower pointed inward, not toward a speaker or altar, but the center of the floor. No words came through them, just vibration. A low, steady tone that shifted slightly when anyone moved. Varnock leaned toward one tower and touched the casing. He recoiled fast, his face pale, whispering that it had spoken in a thought he didn't know was his. The tone persisted. Not a message, not a signal, just something that had always been there. Waiting. Thekla moved without being told. Her hand met the base of a tower, and a change passed through the space like the turning of a page. The vox crackled, slow at first, then let loose a wave of sound. Not static, not error. A chant built of many voices overlapping, none loud, none alone. Their meanings blurred, but names broke free from the tide. Some were known, Astartes long dead, commanders from old records. One returned often, Sorat. Each time that name sounded, the voice changed. Sometimes calm, other times filled with pain or fury or shame. No rhythm held for long. The Vox Towers were not speaking to each other or repeating a message. They were remembering. The voices receded as quickly as they came. The silence afterward felt louder than the chant. Elua scanned one tower. No active data stream. The hardware shouldn't have worked. No power source connected. The readings showed no input, no signal, nothing but temperature shifts and electromagnetic fluctuation far below what could cause broadcast. Yet something had moved through it. Varnock sat down, holding his head, muttering that the voices layered themselves in ways words couldn't carry. The message wasn't about Sorat. It was Sorat, not a record, but an impression. A psychic scar burned into the steel, not left behind but woven in place. They moved on, down the spiral corridor that followed. It coiled around them, steps narrowing with every loop. Walls now bore carvings, long and deep, etched into the structure as if knifed in with strength that shouldn't exist. They weren't runes, not language in any traditional form, not symbols of chaos, not glyphs of the Mechanicus. These were shapes cut into thought, meant to be read by feeling. Thekla traced a few of them with her eyes. She said nothing. Elua heard her whisper only once. They weren't warnings. They were regrets. At the end of the spiral, the hall opened into a dome that swallowed sound. Not from its size, but from the way it absorbed breath and voice and motion. At its heart stood a platform, ringed by pillars that leaned forward, wrapped in broken chains. The floor reflected no light. The ceiling vanished in shadow. On the platform rested a helmet, its red coloring faded, its mouth grill fractured. Next to it lay a Vox unit, half buried in dust, the casing worn but intact. Elua approached, reached out, paused just before contact. The Vox came online without prompt. Its voice cut the silence. I knelt here once, for him, for the angel, for the Emperor, but he did not hear me. No one heard me. Only the nails. The voice held pain, not as memory but as weight, a pressure that passed through the ribs and settled near the heart. It didn't repeat. It waited. Varnock's torch rolled from his grip, casting light toward the edge of the dome. The beam found shapes that hadn't moved. Rows of figures hunched between pillars. Some were full suits of armor left empty. Others were forms wrapped in robes, metal folded over muscles still bent in supplication. None turned, none moved, but they were not gone. Thekla stepped toward them. Her voice dropped as she said they weren't hostile, just trapped. Bound in remembrance, voices caught between function and faith. The helmet on the platform did not belong to the others. It wasn't discarded. It had been placed. The position, the way the Vox sat beside it, the symmetry. It was a shrine. Elua checked the surrounding field with his scanner. No mechanical presence, no warp trace. Still, he could feel the way the air folded around the space. The choir beneath the ship hadn't died. They had become part of it. No longer Astartes, not demons, not ghosts, just memories too strong to dissolve. He lifted the helmet and felt the shift before the Vox resumed. I didn't scream at the end. That's what matters. Elua let the helmet rest again. Varnock stayed back. Thekla stared at the Vox, waiting, but it said no more. The choir had given them what they could. Nothing more would come from this place. They returned to the spiral, the steps behind them already sealed by the ship itself. A smooth wall now stood in place of the passage. The dome room faded into quiet once more, as if it had never opened. Back through the halls, new markings showed the way. Not lighted signs or control panels, just small traces. Scored lines near vents, tilted frames. Air moved differently now, guiding them toward another descent. No alarm sounded, no threats chased, but none of them looked back. What waited deeper still wasn't another message. It was the root of it. The path guided them down without rails, without lights, without choices. The floor sloped just enough that walking felt like falling slowly. The steel turned darker with each meter. Not stained, not rusted. It was as if the material itself had grown old in thought. No chamber on the ship's map matched what they entered next. It felt like a lung, wide, hollow, with rib-like beams stretching into the distance. The air moved, not in gusts, but with the slow push of memory. The room had no clear source of light, yet they saw well enough. Varnock whispered that the walls breathed. Elur checked for pressure changes but found none. Still, it felt true. They reached a center point. The ground dipped into a shallow basin lined with metal thorns. Shapes lay there, fragments of armor, pieces of vox units, wires braided into tight coils like nervous system strands. At the basin's middle stood a single throne, not built for comfort or rule. It was welded from broken chain blades and bolter casings. The seat pulsed faintly beneath dust. Thekla stepped forward first, her voice unsure. She asked who the throne was built for. Elur didn't answer. He knew what it meant. The throne had no name carved into it, but they had already heard that name whispered again and again. Sorat. Varnock ran a hand across one of the iron thorns. It responded, not with movement, but with resonance. A low, sharp tone sounded, short and precise. He took a step back, not from pain, but because something had looked at him in that moment. Not from the room, from beneath it. The vox hiss started again. This time the source was clearer. The seat was wired to a buried array. Elur activated his interface, pulling power slowly from his reserves. The link caught. Words spilled across the screen in fragments. Nails too loud, prayers bleed out, silence hurts worse. The line cut out. Another followed. Flesh remembers, machine forgets, let me forget. Each line came in waves, not spoken, not written in proper command line, more like thoughts pulled from memory without structure. The Vox array wasn't just playing old logs, it was reliving them. Elur dug deeper. The array had a backup drive. He opened it. Inside were dozens of files, most corrupted. One remained whole. It played without command. The voice returned, not the calm tone they had heard before. This one trembled, not from weakness, but from strain, like it held something back behind every syllable. I tried, it said. I held the line, not for the angel, not for the throne. I held it for myself, so that I would not become what they became. But the nails don't let you stop. They keep singing even when your mouth is shut. Thekla whispered that she felt the same pressure now. Not pain, not fear, just force. Like she was being shaped by sound that had no words. The ground beneath the throne shifted slightly. A panel lowered, revealing a pit lined with vox pipes. They weren't standard. Some looked organic, Others were bent, twisted into spirals. They pulsed in time, not to the ship, not to the room, to a thought none of them could trace. The pit began to glow. Varnock shouted to Elur to cut the signal. He tried, but the system ignored him. It wasn't responding to commands anymore. It responded to presence. The pipes started to release air in soft bursts, timed like breath. A sound followed. Not music, not machine. The closest thing Elur could compare it to was sobbing through steel. The display changed. A single line blinked. The Lament engine awakens. Elur didn't understand the phrase. Not fully. But something in the design made it clear. This was not a weapon, not a core. It was a place meant to contain grief. The World Eaters had cut out everything human in their transformation, but something had stayed buried beneath the rage. That residue had to go somewhere. It couldn't be purged, so it had been stored. Here, Sorat had been a chaplain, a guide for minds already on fire. His duty wasn't to command, it was to remember, even as his own thoughts were sliced apart by the nails. The engine had recorded it, all of it, not as data, as emotion, poured into copper and brass and bone, sealed under a throne forged from the remnants of what used to be reason. The pipes sang once more, louder this time. The tone reached into the walls, passed through the hallways, shook dust from the ceiling. The room around them began to alter, not by movement, by pressure. The chamber no longer felt empty. It had weight now, like a presence walked the edges, not seen, not imagined. Elur turned to Thekla. She had gone still. Her lips moved. He leaned closer and caught the words. I saw him die, not on the field, inside. Varnock held his slate high, recording the pulse. The pattern wasn't random. The rhythm matched old Legion chants. Modified, bent, each note broken, repaired, repeated. Not for worship, for endurance. Elur checked the outer wall. Symbols had appeared. Slow burn lines forming as if the ship responded to the song. The markings told no story. They simply acknowledged it. The chair cracked. Not from stress. It split down the center, folding open like a broken seal. Inside was a hollow cavity shaped for a body. No remains rested there now. Only the imprint. A human shape. Astartes size. Metal fused into the steel. A nameplate at the center. Sorat, last of Choir Red. That title had never appeared in any Imperial record. Not on Legion rosters, not on traitor lists. It was something private, created by those who no longer had the right to speak in public. Choir Red wasn't a rank, it was a group, a silent brotherhood that had seen too much and held on just long enough to fall together. The chamber lights pulsed one last time, then shut down. The glow remained only in the engine. Then even that faded. The air cleared. The walls softened. The throne resealed itself. The pit closed without sound. Varnock stood silent. Thekla stepped away without a word. Elur felt no threat, just stillness. They left without speaking. The corridor behind them folded in on itself. Where the pit had once been, only smooth floor remained. The engine had awakened, but it hadn't opened in anger. It had been heard. The corridor bent downward again, but this time there were no signs of age. The walls held no scars or rust, no cables dragging across the floor. Smooth panels curved like grown skin, not shaped by hands, but formed over years by heat and pressure. Their boots tapped gently across the surface, the only sound still allowed in this place. Light followed them in lines above, neither bright nor dim, just enough to show the way. It did not flicker. It had no hum. Whatever power ran here didn't come from engines or generators. The passage led to a doorway shaped like a chapel arch, wide enough for a dreadnought, tall enough to allow banners that no longer hung. Symbols surrounded the frame, etched shallow into the arch. No language, just marks like teeth. Inside, the chamber stretched long with glass walls dimly glowing red. Light seeped through from an unknown source behind the stained panels. The images in the glass made no sense. Shapes formed half-scenes, limbs in chains, helms twisted open, a pulpit burning beneath a falling blade. At the center stood a stairwell of spiraled bone and black metal, leading straight down into shadow. Varnock slowed at the edge. The stairs pulled the light into them, as if sound, color, and memory all sank in at once. Thekla stood still. Her hands gripped the front of her robe, not in prayer, but in tension. She whispered the word again. Sorat. Not as fear, not as reverence. Just a name too heavy to leave behind. They descended. The stairwell was colder than the decks above. Not freezing. Hollow. The air moved like breath being held back, like thought hiding in stone. The walls were covered in layered glass, the same crimson as above, but no longer shaped. It poured and hardened around the shaft like blood cooled in motion. At the bottom stood a single room. Stone floor. Walls curved upward without seam. No shrine, no machine, no icon. Just a bench carved into the wall, low and long, with dust across its length. At the far end, a figure rested beside a broken pulpit. Its armor had faded, the red trim barely visible, the white scratched to grey. A bolt pistol lay across its knees. The vox link in its hand still pulsed. No movement, no threat, just wait. The air thickened. Elur stepped closer. The scanner read partial gene patterns. World Eater's lineage. Neural scars where the nails had once been. Long dormant. The chest plate had been carved with a short line, deep and uneven. I remembered. No other details stood out. No rank badge, no unit code, no personal sigil. Varnock approached the side wall, raising his torch to scan the panels. Beneath the dust, more carvings had formed. Nothing deep, just scratches, thousands of them, covering the stone like cracked glass. Each seemed to follow the same curved motion. The Vox unit activated. No speech came, just air pulled in through old filters, released in slow rhythm. One breath, then another. Not a signal, not a loop. Just the sound of someone who had not stopped trying to breathe. The walls began to change. Crimson light dimmed. Shapes within the stained glass started to move, bending as if the images inside tried to leave the glass. No clear motion, just pressure. The kind that turns stillness into presence. The bench along the side wall cracked, not from weight, from sound. A low tone emerged, one not carried through the air but pressed into the stone. Elur stepped back. Thekla stood at the pulpit staring downward. She whispered that something beneath the floor remembered more than it should. Varnock checked his slate. The scanner pulsed in strange rhythm, matching the breath from the Vox. No signal came from the corpse. The readings came from under the chapel. The floor itself had become part of the memory. Elur moved toward the center of the room, scanning for an entrance. Nothing appeared. Then the light changed. The banners lining the edge lifted slightly, drawn upward by a wind that didn't exist. The sound deepened. Then a hatch opened at the base of the pulpit. It slid aside without noise. The chamber below revealed no light, no stairs, just a shaft filled with dry air and still bones fused along the wall in long curves. No skulls, no full skeletons, only the long remains of limbs pressed tight against black stone. Each bone bore one mark, a burn shaped like a seal. Thekla turned to Elur. She said it wasn't a tomb, it was a confession vault. Elur didn't hesitate. He dropped a marker light into the shaft. It fell slowly, caught in some unseen pull, as if the air resisted the descent. No sound returned, but a faint echo of breath rose back up. The same rhythm, the same pace. They prepared to descend. Whatever lived below the Red Chapel wasn't part of the ship. It wasn't alive in body, but it breathed through steel and stone and time. It had waited for listeners, not to speak, but to share the silence it had shaped. Thekla knelt before the hatch. Her fingers moved in a slow circle over the edge, tracing symbols only she saw. Elur dropped into the dark, the shaft closing behind him without a sound. The walls felt close, but didn't press in, shaped more by memory than design. No seams marked the fall. The air slowed his descent like hands guiding him down. When his boots touched the ground, it gave slightly, firm but layered with something soft, not dust, not soil, something old. Light drifted from the walls, not bright, more like the echo of light. It made the space seem deeper than it was, as though time still moved here, but sound had long stopped keeping pace. A long chamber stretched forward, lined with cables that trailed into the floor like veins. A throne waited at the center, built from parts that didn't match. Its frame held pieces of chain blades, broken servitor limbs, cracked vox casings. It had no symmetry, no elegance, just function. Thekla reached the floor moments later. She stepped beside him, eyes distant, her face marked with ash that hadn't been there before. She kept her gaze on the throne. No words came from her mouth, but the way her hands moved said she recognized something. Varnok climbed down slower. His boots hit with more force, the landing jarring him. He took a moment, then followed the trail of cables to where they vanished beneath the seat. He reached for his slate, paused, then lowered it again. The machine had already begun. A hum passed through the floor. It moved up Elur's legs, through his arms, into the back of his skull. Not a sound, but a shape, carried by rhythm. A pattern he didn't know, but somehow understood. The cables twitched. The clamps on the arms clicked once. The Vox array opened. "I remember the fire," the voice said. "Not how it started, just the heat. I thought pain would end it. I was wrong." No source marked the voice. It wasn't recorded. It rose from within the room like a breath returned to air after too many years held back. Thekla stepped forward. She placed her palm on one of the clamps. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from pressure rising through her body. She closed her eyes. The clamp warmed. Symbols glowed beneath her touch, then faded. Varnok moved closer to the throne's back. He pointed out markings hidden behind a loose panel. The names had been scratched in without order. Some he read out loud, but others had no meaning. Not in Gothic, not in any Legion record. The names had been erased from history, then hidden here to survive in silence. The screen on Elur's wrist lit up. It didn't request input. It displayed a phrase. Sorat, Choir Red, Final echo. Then it played. Images surged through Elua's thoughts. A sky torn open, a field burned clean of soil, where titans fell like broken statues. The world eaters charged across it, silent now, no longer needing war cries. The nails in their skulls sang louder than orders. He stood in Sorat's memory just for a moment, seeing through his eyes. Not as warrior, as keeper. Sorat once led prayers for those about to break. He stood in ruined chapels and whispered into shattered helms. The nails took those memories one by one. The last to go was his own voice. He tried to save it. He built this chamber before it left him completely. The vision ended with a figure sitting on the throne, clamps locking around his wrists, his chest still rising though his face remained hidden. The sound faded. Elua opened his eyes. The machine now pulsed, slow, regular. The throne had not broken. It had held this rhythm since its creation. Thekla turned to face Elua. Her mouth opened slightly, though no words followed. Her lips shaped one name. She nodded once, then turned back. Varnock scanned the floor. He pointed at a circle etched around the base of the throne. The marking looked like a containment seal, but older, drawn by hand, not stamped. The circle had breaks, not flaws, but places left unfinished. Like the seal was made to be opened. Elua stepped across it. He touched the side of the throne. The hum changed. No alarm, no lights. The tone shifted from background to center. It formed a voice again. I held the silence, it said. I carried it when no one else would. Then quiet. Not absence. A pause that invited response. Thekla placed her hand near the base of the cables. They don't want release, she said. They want to be heard. Varnock crouched near the edge of the seal. His hand hovered over one of the broken points. He didn't cross it. Elua placed both palms on the throne. The metal felt warm, not from power, from memory. The throne locked once more. The clamps clicked, the cables shuddered. A final voice rose. Not Sorat's, not Astartes. Something older, something behind the rage. The nails scream when there's nothing left to cut. That's when you begin to remember. The floor under their feet trembled, then calmed. The lights didn't return. They hadn't gone out. They had never been on. The sound eased. The vault no longer pulsed. The chamber held still. The machine did not restart. It had finished. The shaft that had taken them down into Sorat's memory never reopened. No wind, no tremor, no seal release. Just absence, as if the way itself had never existed. The wall behind them stretched smooth, untouched, and without shadow. They followed the path ahead, one not marked on any map. The corridor had no visible design, no seams, no panels, no lines to show it had ever been built. It simply was. The ship no longer resisted their movement. It no longer breathed the weight of its dead. Something had passed. The tension folded inward, buried back in steel. This new corridor curved in long arcs, forming gentle spirals that wrapped upward. It did not loop. It climbed with intent, always turning, always rising, like the coil of a memory being drawn slowly out of the dark. They didn't speak. There was nothing left that needed saying. Whatever truth had waited in the deep no longer pressed against them. As they ascended, the air lost its chill. The lights grew brighter, though they never flickered or flared. Everything here operated on rhythm, soft, balanced, without strain. No bulkhead slammed, no power hissed, no cables sparked. The ship had fallen quiet, but not dead, not emptied, settled. At the top of the path stood a chamber unlike the others. No red glow, no shattered glass, no bones hidden beneath banners. The walls were tall and white, with vaulted ribs overhead, shaped not for intimidation, but for peace. The structure held a simple symmetry. No altar, no shrine, no throne. Just 3 rows of long benches facing a raised platform where nothing stood. Varnock entered first and removed his rebreather. His chest rose once, then again. He looked up, eyes following the curves in the ceiling. No grime coated the surfaces, no dust clung to the corners. He didn't step forward. He stood near the door and watched. Thekla walked down the center aisle and took a seat on the front bench. She folded her hands, not in prayer, not in ritual, just stillness. Her fingers, once trembling, now rested without movement. Her head bowed, but not in shame. The light above touched her softly. Elua remained standing near the edge. He saw a faint shimmer on the far wall, a shift in texture that didn't match the rest of the surface. He approached and found a panel set flush with the steel. No handle, no lock. When he touched it, the wall gave way. Inside rested a single plate, a polished square of brass, no larger than a data slate. It bore an etched line across the center. One word had been scratched into it, not carved by machine but written by hand, etched unevenly. Heard. That was all. No origin, no signature. He closed the panel and left it untouched. The room didn't react. A faint tone passed through the floor. Not enough to shake the air, but enough to feel in the ribs. One breath. A slow, drawn pull. Then nothing. They stood in the ship's final memory. The place built not for war, but for release. No weapons lined the racks. No shrines called for sacrifice. This space had not been made for the sons of Angron, who raged through the galaxy. It had been made for what remained of them. A place for the broken to sit with what they had lost. No data logs played. No ghosts spoke. The ship no longer reached into their thoughts. The presence remained, but only as quiet recognition. They had seen what they were meant to. They had heard what few had ever dared to listen to. Varnock took a seat near the door. He looked smaller now. His armor had dulled, his tools no longer clattered at his side. He didn't adjust his settings. He didn't speak into his vox. He just sat, shoulders forward, head low, the way someone sits after carrying something too long. Elua stepped up to the platform. It was a simple dais, its surface bare except for faint marks where someone had once knelt. Not recently, long ago. The metal held the imprint of limbs, a chest, a helm lowered in submission. Nothing dramatic, no gesture of theater, just wear. Beneath the platform, a light blinked once. A vox port, dormant until now, opened. The interface didn't activate. It didn't request data. It recorded. No indicator showed length. No prompt asked for input. The ship waited, not for a confession, not for more pain, just for presence. Elua stood still. His thoughts didn't race. He had no speech prepared, no truths to declare. He leaned forward and spoke only 3 words. "I heard you." The vox recorded, then stopped. The light went out. A second tone passed through the chamber, this one lighter than the first. The floor warmed, not with heat, but with release. Thekla rose from her seat. She stepped beside the platform, reached down, and placed her fingers on the surface. "I carried part of him," she said, not to Allure, not to herself, but to the space. She didn't cry. Her voice didn't break. What she released didn't need to show itself in sound. When her hand lifted, she turned and walked to the exit door. It opened. Beyond the chamber, the hallway continued for a short distance and ended in a sealed airlock. A simple transfer dock, standard Imperial design, perfectly maintained. No corrosion, no decay. The interface requested a key. Allure stepped forward, reached beneath his robe and withdrew a brass token. He didn't remember picking it up. He didn't remember placing it in his pouch. But it fit the lock. The mechanism accepted it. The hatch cycled open. The air on the other side smelled clean. They stepped aboard their transport. The ship didn't protest. No static bled through the vox. No last voice cried out. It didn't need to. Venter Marlem had passed them what it held. The craft lifted, sealed, and detached. From orbit, the silhouette of the World Eater's relic ship looked like a blade pressed into black cloth. Its outer hull no longer showed damage. Its scars remained, but they had settled. The Legion markings had faded until they no longer called for blood. No more screams echoed through its frame. Its signal no longer cycled war hymns or corrupted distress calls. Instead, it transmitted a single frequency. Not wideband, not encrypted. Just one sound, every 9 hours, breath in, breath out. That signal never asked for response. It simply reminded. The logs from their mission remained locked. Allure refused debrief. Varnock filed transfer papers, requested reassignment to surface labor on a planet that held no machine spirits, a world with oceans and storms. He signed his forms in silence and departed within a week. Thekla stayed with the silent order. She gave up speaking, not for vow or punishment. She no longer needed to shape words aloud. The slate Allure kept from the mission sat on his desk for 6 days untouched. When he opened it, a single entry waited. Choir read, located. No coordinates, no extension file, just that name, glowing in a red tone too dim to have come from the system's palette. He did not file it. He didn't shut it down. At night, the slate blinked once. Not in call, not for attention. It marked time. The same rhythm Sorat had carried into the dark, the same beat left behind in the floor of the Lament engine. On the 8th day, Allure returned to the ship's outer registry and reviewed the nameplate recovered from the vault. The inscription had changed. Not the shape, not the frame, the wording. "Here rested Choir Red. Now heard." He didn't react. He placed the plate back into its seal. The machine that logged it didn't register the change. Only he had seen it. The next signal from Venter Malem arrived at the exact time expected. No distortion, no message, just the sound of air moving through thought. That would never stop. Not because the ship still needed to speak, because someone now listened.